The end of the year is here, and while there have been no shortage of highlights for sports fans in 2024, the year has served up quite a few duds as well. Tom Brady doing NFL commentary, Saudi Arabia awarded the World Cup. Whatever the hell is going on with streaming providers and sports. All bad, but none make this list. So what did make the cut? Well, let's just jump right into it. Here are the 11 worst things to happen in sports in 2024. I do not know what is happening with the NBA right now. It seems like everyone just wants to write a eulogy about how basketball is dying 2 months into a season. The 2 months of every NBA season that almost no one cares about. Basketball will always be an afterthought during November and December. A drop in television ratings and some drama surrounding inside the NBA is hardly a death spiral. The overreaction surrounding the NBA's quote-unquote plight or fall or whatever you want to label it is just absurd. Really, all this does is serve to highlight the league's biggest issue. Stop starting the season in autumn when no one's going to pay attention to it. Let's start the NBA season around Christmas time. It is the ideal starting point. That's because this is just a natural transition from the football season. Their calendar is slowing down, basketball can ramp up, and then you have a hard out in August. It's a situation where everyone wins. But no, let's just spend all of 2024 talking about how basketball and the NBA are slowly dying or fading away or whatever the discourse happens to be on during any given day. 2024 was not the year you wanted to be drafting San Francisco 49ers players in your fantasy football league. Sure, George Kittle has been as good as advertised from a fantasy football perspective, but Christian McCaffrey and Brandon Ayuk were busts due to injuries. The whole CMC fiasco was a joke for fantasy football managers. He didn't get put on IR until well after drafts had started, but before the first game of the regular season. He then comes back, gets hurt again. It's just a total waste of a first-round draft pick. That situation was rough, but still kind of understandable. Whatever the hell is happening with Deebo Samuel, though, is just confusing. He has looked like a passenger in most games, scoring in single digits. And if you were in the first round of your fantasy football playoffs and happened to start Brock Purdy at quarterback, well, chances are you're not in the playoffs anymore. I suppose you could put the entire 49ers season on this list if you wanted to, if you were a Niners fan, but I'm not a Niners fan. I'm just someone who plays fantasy football. And from that perspective, the 49ers definitely make this list of the worst of sports in 2024. Florida State football over the past 12 months is the quintessential case of bait and switch. The Seminoles began this year ranked in the top 10 with aspirations of a college football playoff appearance. That is after they spent the first 8 months of this year complaining about how they were left out of the previous year's college football playoff. Of course, that was due to extenuating circumstances surrounding Jordan Travis. I don't really want to reopen that can of worms. That's a whole other topic for a whole other day. But yeah, Florida State really salty, and they went into 2024 on what was supposed to be a revenge tour in a season that was going to end with them finally getting that playoff berth they coveted. Instead, FSU finished dead last in the ACC and mustered a single win against an FBS opponent. That, by the way, a total fluke. Cal outgained Florida State in that game, and if it wasn't for a pair of missed field goals from short range, they lose. And one of those field goals was just shanked and the other was blocked. It was wild scenes. Ultimately, though, everything about the Seminoles in 2024 was a disaster. This has to be rock bottom for that football program. If Florida State football sank to rock bottom, then the Sacramento Kings are just on a path to nowhere. They ended last season getting bounced in the play-in, gave up a first-round pick swap in 2031 for a 35-year-old DeMar DeRozan, and have still managed to be one of the most disappointing teams in all of the NBA to begin this year. They are currently 4 games under 500, and of their 13 wins, well, that figure is propped up by the fact they beat the Utah Jazz on 3 separate occasions. Now, De'Aaron Fox is kind of making rumblings about how he's not exactly looking to stay in Sacramento if the team doesn't start winning. It's bad. Where's this franchise going? As a Kings fan, as a Sacramentan, I have no idea. Best case scenario, in 2024-2025, they backdoor their way into the postseason. Even if that were to occur, they're very unlikely to win a playoff series. The future of the franchise is looking increasingly bleak. The Sacramento Kings are on a path to nowhere again. Of course, it's not all of that surprising given the bumbling fool steering this ship. I am not an Olympics guy. I get it. I understand why people like watching the Olympics. I myself am not anti-Olympics. However, I just don't care to invest in a sporting event that everyone will immediately forget. In fact, the only times anyone remembers anything about the Olympic Games is when an athlete such as Michael Phelps or Usain Bolt does something so spectacular and historical it's impossible to ignore, or an athlete does something really dumb. We didn't get much of the former in 2024. We did get the latter in the form of Raygun. The 2024 Paris Games will forever be remembered for this Australian breakdancer who seems to be taking herself a little bit too seriously these days. I mean, maybe the Turkish shooting guy gets remembered as well, but really, Raygun is the takeaway from the 2024 Olympics, and that is the worst. Let's take something people like and we know works and make it worse. Much, much, much worse. That is what UEFA has done with the Champions League. A change so terrible, so god-awful that it seems to have injected new life into the disastrous Super League project that literally no one wants outside of a handful of rich clubs. Barf. Some will point to the plight of Manchester City and Paris Saint-Germain as reasons to think this new format is good. Here's the catch. Both of those clubs, even after their bad starts, are still likely to make it to the knockout round. That is because 24 of the 36 sides in this Frankenstein of a table still get through. We are literally playing games with minimal stakes. Why even bother? Why not just go straight to a knockout round? You're only playing games for TV money. It seems like the only defense anyone seems to offer up for the new Champions League format is, well, it's not that bad. It's not that bad is only an acceptable defense for cheap dinners, taxi rides, and bootleg movies purchased in Morocco. You know, there was 5 minutes of black in the middle and some of it was randomly dubbed in French, but that bootleg of MacGruber I purchased in Meknes, it wasn't that bad. As for the new Champions League format, it sucks. At this point, I'd probably rather watch that MacGruber bootleg again over what is being served up in what used to be the pinnacle of club soccer. Caitlyn Clark's impact on women's basketball has been transformational. She has single-handedly raised the sports profile to an entirely new level. That is pretty cool. Yet somewhere along the way, Clark has gone from a media darling to being a figurehead for debates she has little to do with. Everybody wants to be all up in her business and make her the face of their argument. It's wild because Clark herself is so milquetoast. She is very uncontroversial. You'd have to be squeezing your tiny flaccid pecker really hard to make her this lightning rod of debate. Take, for instance, Clark simply acknowledging the existence of white privilege in a Time magazine article. Hardly groundbreaking if you cannot admit that white people in America have had about a 250 to 300 year head start over other minorities, and that has put us in an advantageous position, then you're as blind as Angel Hernandez behind home plate. You would have thought Clark took a dump on one of those Trump Bibles with this statement. One side is portraying her as this weird white anti-Christ. I don't even know what they're arguing. They don't even know what they're arguing. They're just trying to make it out like acknowledging white privilege is a bad thing. But this is a two-sided issue because those on the other side of the debate are trying to use her as a figurehead for their movement, trying to make it out like she's this hero for acknowledging white privilege. Like, come on, everyone, let's settle down. All Caitlyn Clark did is acknowledge a very simple, basic fact. Good on her, but don't drag her name, don't drag her into this debate that has nothing to do with her. And make no mistake, this is just one example of Caitlyn Clark being dragged into an issue that she has little to do with. Let her play basketball, let her live her life. Stop making her this figurehead for your debates. I know some of you will be thumping on your keyboard, something, something, DEI lover, something, 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 but I would like to remind you a quick fact about the own logic you like to use. The minute you hit enter on that comment, you have been triggered. I win, you lose. Also, if you say nothing, I win, you lose. That is your logic. That is the rules of the game you have set. So unless you want to claim Klingon right of vengeance, which you can't because you are not a Klingon and I am not a Klingon, we are just going to move past this. Do we even play college football games anymore? Or is everyone involved with the sport happy just bitching about things they do not like? Coaches bitched about how there weren't enough playoff spots, so we expanded the playoffs. Now coaches want to bitch about how their 3-loss team didn't make the cut for the postseason. Hello, you lost 3 games. Get over it. The transfer portal, that's not good, according to coaches who also still feel entitled to leave their own teams high and dry whenever they feel like. Weak-gutted politicians in Ohio not only complained about flag planting, but now want to make it illegal because they are soft. And the list just goes on and on and on. Everybody has a bone to pick and they would rather focus on bitching about perceived injustices than, just playing the games. This isn't to say we can't have discussions about important topics related to college football. But now, gosh almighty, we are just letting these raging college football debates consume everything in their path. It's just too much. It's way too much. Sadly, I don't see this bitch factory that is college football closing down anytime soon. Instead, athletic directors, coaches, players, and fans will keep acting like a bunch of sandy butt cracks while some shady folks off in the shadows make money off this sideshow. The Arena Football League didn't just fail again. It collapsed in such a spectacular fashion that no one will ever try to use the name Arena Football League again. I will never forget the sight of people holding up padding to serve as makeshift walls in Louisiana during that opening weekend of games. The AFL 3.0, it never had a chance. As soon as everything hit the fan, literally minutes after the season kicked off, those running the third version of the AFL ran into a bunker, never to be seen or heard from again. Jeff Fisher and a few others managed to get this season over the line, including playing the championship game in a mall, something that I actually kind of like. GCW actually ran a show at the American Dream later. I think it's a cool setup just having an event in a mall like that, whether it is arena football or professional wrestling. That cool setup aside, the Arena Football League this year was a travesty, ruining the good name of something many people still have fond memories of. The entire situation was so awful that leadership opted for a name change. They'll keep this thing going in 2025, this time under the banner of AF1. Good luck to them. The Arizona Coyotes deserved better. Their fans in particular deserved a hell of a lot better than the fate that befell them. They were failed by an owner who never had the financial or technical capacity to get a new arena over the line. Artie Morello botched things so badly that no time was permitted for a local ownership group to be found. The franchise had to move to Utah, and they had to move there immediately because things were simply no longer viable in the desert. Not only was that not the fault of fans, but those supporters of the Coyotes never really had a chance to say goodbye because everything happened so quickly. 1 minute they're there and it looks like they're staying, and then the next minute it's deuces, we'll see you in Salt Lake City. If there is a silver lining, the faintest of silver linings, it appears that Morella has ceded his rights to the market, meaning a new ownership group could potentially make inroads on an expansion franchise in Arizona. Whether that happens remains to be seen. The arena issue still remains, but hopefully for those passionate hockey fans in the desert, they do get another shot at this. What happened to the Coyotes in 2024 was a very sad story and one that probably deserved more attention than it received. But because things happened so quickly, in a blink of an eye, it sort of just fell by the wayside. Before we jumped into the worst thing that happened in sports in 2024, a few honorable mentions. Aaron Rodgers, all-inclusive, just bad. The Bucks NBA Cup banner. Tell me your franchise doesn't care about something without saying you don't care about that something. Josh Emmett not fighting in 2024. Bummer for Sacramento's own to not fight for 12 months after a career-defining win against Bryce Mitchell. The USA Rugby League canceling their championship game at the last moment for the second year in a row. The worst thing to happen in sports in 2024, it is cheap baseball owners stealing the show. What a time to be a cheapskate owning an MLB franchise, as baseball itself struggles with a very real identity crisis that now sees the sport dressed up like Creed Bratton pretending to be in his 20s.
Sometimes a guy's got to ride the bull. Am I right? Later, skater.
The league's cheapskate owners continue to be thrusted in the spotlight for gross negligence and behaviors that would make Ebenezer Scrooge blush. We're approaching the 2-year mark of the Oakland Athletics announcing their intentions to relocate to Las Vegas. And somehow, nearly 2 years down the track, John Fisher doesn't have an actual financial plan to bankroll that stadium. All he has is a banknote saying he's good for the money. Meanwhile, he's being forced to wildly overpay for free agents who have zero desire to play in a minor league ballpark in Sacramento simply to avoid a complaint from the Players Association, who are only allowing this abomination of a temporary relocation to happen if Fisher overpays for Gio Urshela. Like, oh, disgusting. But I mean, I guess good for those handful of players who get fat contracts in the process. The Tampa Bay Rays also playing in a minor league stadium, also in a complete mess because their sad sack ownership group felt like it was okay to use a hurricane as an excuse to haggle over financing for their new ballpark. The less said about Jerry Reinsdorf and the Chicago White Sox, the better. But hey, at least he may actually be selling that team. Diamondbacks owner Ken Kendrick continues to drop these hints about relocation should he not get all of the financing and all of the funding he wants for Chase Field renovations. John Stanton up in Seattle continues to be one of the most epic failures around. Brewers ownership made things unnecessarily complicated with their local government over funding for renovations at their ballpark. About half, maybe even 2/3 of Major League Baseball's owners are trying to do things as cheaply as possible. And they operate that way knowing the expanded postseason and natural variance of baseball makes the playoffs attainable for just about everyone should things break the right way. Being lucky, well, it sure beats spending money. And even if you're mediocre to below average, well, chances are you can still turn a rather nice profit. The entire thing just absolutely gross. And baseball owners are the worst thing in sports in 2024. Thank you for watching this video, and for some of my favorite videos from the past 12 months, well, check out the right-hand side of your screen. Until next time, I am Cheyenne Hollis. This is the Touchback. Happy New Year, and hashtag take it out to the 25.
I'm 30. Well, in November I'll be 30.